Hi, everybody, it's Chris here, and welcome back to Beyond the Macro Recorder, the series where we try to move beyond recorded VBA and take your code to the next level by looking at our four key skills: position control in Excel VBA, loops, conditional statements, and using buttons to trigger macros. Now, if you haven't seen video one, the series playlist is in the pinned comment below this video. You can go and check out video one, but we looked at dynamic position control, one of the key skills you're going to need to move to the next level. And in this session, we're working on the most powerful technique in Excel VBA and computer programming generally, which is loops. Now, I hope you're going to download the download files and work along with me. They're available at the download link in the video description. All the files are there. As we go through the series, we're going to put some bonus resources up there. So you just got to put your email in, and I will send you a promotional email about our fantastic Members Monday community. You can take a look at that. And if you don't want to hear any more from us, you can just hit unsubscribe. So with that said, let's get back into Beyond the Macro Recorder. So what have we done so far? Well, we've taken one sheet and using our VBA, we've been able to sort the data, but not just sort the data, we've been able to sort the data dynamically. And this is what we did last session. We used a variable here that's going to work regardless of what data is in the file, dynamic position control. But what if you're saying, well, Chris, I've got three sheets. Yeah. And I'm not recommending you spread data across sheets like this necessarily. I've got three sheets. I want to use one macro to do the same thing to three different sheets. Very common thing to want to do. What's the concept here? Well, we've got a repeated action. We're doing one thing three times. So what does that mean? That means a loop. A loop in Excel VBA that allows us to repeat some instructions any number of times. And in this case, we want to repeat some instructions three times because we want to do, if I can see the sheets here, we want to do it to sheet one, sheet two, and sheet three in the file. So with that said, let's get into the VBA editor and let's go ahead and try to create a loop. Now, you could just go ahead and do the coding in this routine. What I recommend when you're learning something new in Excel is to do it in a different routine when you're learning something new in Excel VBA. Why would you do that? Well, it creates what I'd call a safe space, and we're not going to mess up the code that we've already got. We've got confidence here to play around with something new. So we've got a new routine here. I'm going to say loop test. When we name a routine, as I just did, it has to be a single word. So that's why I've got the underscore there. Also got an informative name for the routine so I can understand what the macro does without having to go through the code. And we're going to go ahead and create what I think is the most useful type of loop in Excel VBA, a for each loop for each object in a collection. There's three loop types in VBA: for each, for next, and do until. You can get 99% of jobs done using a for each loop. Let's talk about the concept quickly. Well, Excel is organized into objects. Those objects exist in collections. So what on earth does that mean? Well, a range, for example, is an object. A cell's an object. A button is an object. A chart is an object. The worksheet is an object. The file is an object. So we've got lots of objects. They exist in collections. For example, the worksheets in the file is a collection. The cells in the selected range is a collection. The charts on a sheet is a collection. So just by understanding a little bit about the fundamentals of the language of VBA, we can harness that using a loop, because a for each loop for each object in a collection, it's going to do something to each object in the collection. In this case, each worksheet, or maybe not each worksheet, but some of the worksheets in the file. So with that said, let's get into this one. Now, to use a loop, we usually need a variable. And remember, a variable is just a place to store some information that's useful for us. And you can go back to the previous video if you want to hear a little bit more about variable declarations and things like that. So in this case, I'm going to say Chris sheet as worksheet. Okay. We're declaring a worksheet variable. This is what we call an object variable. In the previous video, we used a string variable and some numerical variables, a long variable there. This is what's called an object variable. It relates to an object in the file. Right, and then we've got our basic syntax, our blueprint for each object in a collection. So I'm going to say for each Chris sheet, that's the name of our object. We're using the variable here to reference the object for each Chris sheet in, I'm going to say this workbook dot sheets. There we go. So this workbook means the workbook that this code lives in, and then sheets is the name of the collection. It could be cells, it could be workbooks. Worksheets is the collection we want to work through. So this is the opening line of the loop. We've opened the loop. We've got to remember to close it straight away. If you don't remember to close a loop, the code is very unlikely to work. How do we close a for next loop? Dead easy. We just say next Chris sheet here. And that's how easy it is. This is a loop in Excel VBA. This is going to repeat an action. How many times, just stop the video and think about this. How many times are we going to go through this loop? And how would you even answer that question? How many times are we going to go through this loop? Well, what's our collection? Is the worksheets in the file. How many worksheets have we got in the file? Don't think we've got any hidden worksheets or anything like that. We've got 4 worksheets in the file. So with this loop, we're looking for something to happen 4 times. So let's do something, and let's not do something directly related to our task yet. We're in our safe space. Let's go ahead and do something really easy. I'm just going to try to flash up the name of each sheet in a message box, and that's going to prove to me that the basics of this routine, the basics of this loop is working. So if I say Chris sheet.name, Chris sheet being the name of the variable, of course, and then the name being one of the properties of the object. And so we talk about objects being organized into collections and those objects having properties. One of those properties is the workbook name. So with that said, I'm going to hit the F8 key. One of our key skills when we're moving beyond the macro recorder, being able to debug and test, you can go to debug and step into. So this allows me to step through the code and then understand what the code's actually doing in the spreadsheet. An incredibly useful facility in Excel VBA. So what's going to happen now? When the line of code is highlighted, it hasn't yet been executed. So I'm going to hit F8 one more time. That line of code is going to execute. What's going to happen? Stop the video, see if you can work this one out. And let's go. 1, 2, 3. We can see we've got sessions, tasks, and key skills. Where's that come from? Well, that's the name. That's the name property of the first worksheet in the file. Can you see how this is working? Now, the magic of loops we're going to see. We're used to code just going down. As Excel executes, it goes down the code, but with a loop, it's going to go back to the top. So Excel's going back through the loop again. What's going to happen now? The second sheet in the file, and the name of the sheet is data1. That's now being displayed in the message box. Hit the F8 key again. What's going to happen? Data2, and then finally data3. So we've looped through the 4 sheets in the file. F8 one more time. You can see we've now come out of that loop because the loop is finished. It's done its work. It's looped through each object in that collection. So see if you can get that working first. This is just our basic loop test here. Okay, so you say, okay, Chris, great, I understand that, but how does this relate back to our task? Well, what do we want to do? We now want to apply this sort routine to each worksheet in the file. So once again, if you're feeling confident, fantastic. Stop the video now and see if you can do this yourself. The basic idea of what we're going to have to do, we're going to copy in a few lines of this code around this code and see if we can get everything working here. First, I'm going to take the opportunity here to do a little bit of tidying up. So remember, anything in green is an annotation or a comment. Excel's going to ignore those lines when we execute the code. We can go ahead and get rid of those. It is good practice to add comments to each line of code. I won't do this now. It's good practice to add comments just to remind you in English or in your native language what the code actually does. So in this case, I'm defining the last row and just putting that in as an example comment. You could go through the whole routine and populate all of the comments there. And now I'm thinking, where does our code need to go? The code we've created in our little testing macro, our safe space, where does it need to go? Well, we need to apply the same idea really to our main macro here. So I'm going to copy in that variable that we declared. That variable makes the loop work. Then, I'm not going to think about it too much at this point. It doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, when we're moving beyond the macro recorder, You're not going to write perfect code. I never write perfect code. So I'm going to, throw it in, and then I'm going to test it. And then we're going to see, broadly speaking, is this working or not? So I've got the beginning of the sheet, the beginning of the loop here, and then the end of the loop. Where's that going to go? Well, I know, broadly speaking, I want to do all of this. This is our sort code. I want to do all of that to each sheet in the file. Yeah. So I want all of that sort code to be embedded in the loop. We can see our main loop construct starting here, finishing here, and we can see that sort code is within the loop. So it's going to happen within the loop. Okay. We just spoke about comments and annotations. There we're talking about good code in practice. Some more good code in practice is indentation. We're going to look at indentation now. Just select all this code on the Windows PC. I'm going to hit Shift Tab. That's going to reset the indentation. And then we want to indent as we want our indentation to reflect the structure of the code. For example, we've got a for next loop here. The for each and the next command should be on the same level of indentation. So here we've got a with, end with construct. I've selected it. I'm just going to tab in. So that's a little bit further across. Just helps us understand the structure of the code. That's the principle of indentation, good code in practice. So we've got comments and annotations and indentation. Right. What's going to happen now? So we've integrated our loop here, and now we've got to do some interrogation, if you like, some investigation. What's this code actually going to do? And can we look through the code and pick out some of the things that are going to be problematic? Well, I can see one thing that's definitely going to be problematic here. So here we've got what we call a hard-coded reference, and we covered these in session one, relating to ranges. Range B5 is a hard-coded reference. It's exactly the same with worksheets. If we have the name of the worksheet actually in the file there, actually in the VBA editor, then it's always going to relate to that worksheet. So what can we do? I've got some ideas here. I'm not absolutely sure, but this is the spirit of going beyond the macro recorder. I'm not absolutely sure what the syntax here is, but I think this is it. So I'm going to substitute that hard-coded reference. I'm going to substitute in our Chris sheet idea here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring the top of the loop up. I want to test, is the loop working in this context? And I want to do a small scale test. I don't want to work through all this code. I'm going to work through a single line of code, and I'm going to check that we're working through each of the workbooks, each of the worksheets in the file here. Okay, so firstly, we've got 3 data sheets, and I've just noticed here, we don't actually want to use this sheet, do we? So either in this video or the next video, we'll look at how to avoid one of these sheets. And if you're thinking ahead, what in Excel VBA, what concepts and technique and skill will allow us to do that? Let's go ahead, hit the F8 key here. So for each Chris sheet in this workbooks.sheets, no errors so far, seem to be going okay. So it's last row. Last row is 8. And the first sheet in the file is that sheet that has the course information on. And it says last row is 8. That seems to make sense because on the first sheet in the file, the last piece of data is on row 8. So far, so good. Hitting the F8 key. Then we're now saying last row is 1141. Second sheet in the file, control and down arrow on the Windows PC. The last value there is on row 1141. Going to continue here. So now we're on data 2, our third sheet in the file. I'm just hovering over the variable here to show me the value in the variable. We've got 386 here. And data 2, we've got 386 there. Going to hit the F8 key one more time. And once more, we've got 386. I'm going to check that on the data 3 sheet, and I can see we've got 306 there. So just working through it step by step, doing these small scale tests, and then gradually building up the complexity of the code here. So my idea to substitute in the variable name for the hard-coded sheet reference, worksheets data 1, for example, that seems to be working. Very encouraging so far. So I'm going to take all of this code, copy it in, and then I'm going to follow the same concept, that small scale concept that I tested. Now we're going to test it on a larger scale. So let's just substitute in wherever we're saying worksheets data one, I want to substitute in. Hopefully this is making sense now. And you're saying, Chris, you want to substitute in Chris sheet. Hopefully you're kind of guessing and thinking ahead. Fantastic stuff. I want to substitute in Chris sheet. So I could do that manually, but we don't have to in VBA. If we want to substitute in a particular piece of syntax, we can go ahead. You can select what you want to substitute. You can hit Control F here. Control F. You can also go to, is it an edit? Fine. Yeah. So you can go to find here. And then we can get the VBA editor to do the work for us here. So I'm going to go to replace. Instead of worksheets data one, I want to substitute in our variable name. Our variable is looping through each sheet in the file. So replace with Chris sheet here. I'm going to go replace all, and then I'm going to do what I call a sense check. A sense check. I'm going to review the code. Does it look sensible? Excel's done a little bit of automated work for us with that find and replace. Let's do a sense check. Does it look sensible what Excel has done here? Active workbook.chrissheets.sortfields.clear. I know we don't need active workbook. At least I don't think we need active workbook. So we're going to go ahead and delete active workbook. Should that create a problem, maybe we could bring it back. Why am I deleting active workbook? Because active workbook, it won't make a big difference in this case, but it's an example of what we'd call direct referencing. Remember, when we're moving beyond the macro recorder, we're trying to move away from active sheets. Yeah, clicking on the sheet and then doing something using active sheet or maybe using selection. That's a direct referencing approach. We're trying to move away from that to remote referencing. So rather than clicking on the sheet and using active sheet, we're using constructs like this, using a variable to reference the sheet remotely. This is one of the features of sophisticated, powerful Excel VBA code, remote rather than direct referencing. So just made some changes, made quite fundamental changes there, haven't we, to the code? So what do we need to do? We need to go ahead and test. So once again, using the debug facility, you can step into, I'm going to use the F8 key here. Just going to check the value of last row. Last row is 8. That seems to be fine. And then we've got some dynamic range definition here. So remember, the first sheet in the file doesn't actually contain data. So I'm not too worried about those range definitions yet. In fact, I'm not even going to run the code here. Now we're going to have a little departure. We're going to have a little preview of our next session, because we're covering loops in this section. Next session, we're covering conditional statements. We're going to have a little preview here, because what do we want to do? I want to say to Excel, moving beyond the recorded code, I want to say, listen, I actually only want to do this if it's not the first sheet in the file. That could be our logic. So I've got an idea. I'm trying to translate it into logic that I could possibly express programmatically in VBA. My logic is going to be, there's various ways to do this. I'm going to say to the VBA editor, don't do this if the name of the sheet is sessions, tasks, and key skills. That's the idea. What technique is going to help us here? Well, it's an example of a conditional statement, which we're going to move on to in session 3. So consider it a bit of a preview here. So with a conditional statement, let's go ahead. The idea of conditionality is something happening we express using the syntax if. So hopefully fairly straightforward and logical. So if the name of the sheet is session, blah, 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 if that's the name of the sheet, how would you express that programmatically? How would you express that in VBA? You might be able to work that out from what we've done so far. So if Chris sheet dot, what property do we want here? It's going to be the name of the sheet, of course. I'm going to say if Chris sheet dot name does not equal this rather verbose. That's what my spreadsheet mentor, the person who taught me spreadsheets, said. It's a rather verbose, it's a long sheet name. It's necessary, I suppose, in the context of the course. But I'm going to take that, I'm going to copy it in, Control C and Control V. That has to be in a speech marks. Those sheet names, They need to be in speech marks there. So if chrissheet.name doesn't equal sessions, tasks, and skills, this, of course, being the notation to express that idea of doesn't equal, then if we're not on that sheet, we want to go ahead and do all of this code. And to complete that if statement, to complete the first line anyway, we've got if, that's our first key piece of syntax, and then we've got then. So we've got if, then we've got our logical test. This is our rule, if you like, that we want Excel to look at. Excel's only going to proceed through this code if this logical test, if this is actually happening in the file. Now, we've opened our end if statement, just like when we open the loop, we've got to remember to close it. It's the same with a conditional statement. When you open the conditional statement at the top, make sure you remember to close it here. And I'm going to go ahead and just assist by putting a comment in here. I'm going to say, if this isn't the first sheet in the file, so just writing in very simple language there, in my native language, what this code is doing. That's going to help us understand. And then just know I copied that annotation and repeated it at the end of the if statement. So that's telling me this opening if statement belongs to, is paired with this closing if statement. Doesn't look like a big problem now, but you might have multiple if statements embedded in each other. That kind of thing, having properly structured code supported by annotations, seriously, I can tell you from years of doing this, you're really going to appreciate that. Now we can go ahead and do some indentation, of course. So we've got a construct, a discrete construct there, just like a loop, in this case, conditional statement. We want to indent that so the structure of the code is reflecting what's going on in terms of the syntax. So how about this? We're only on session 2 in Beyond the Macro Recorder. We've got loops and conditional statements working together in Excel VBA. Incredibly powerful stuff. I'm excited. Is our conditional statement going to work? And just remember, when we step through the code, what we're looking to happen is for us to ignore this first sheet. Let's go ahead. Hitting the F8 key on the Windows PC. Now what's going to happen? Stop the video. We've got to our conditional statement. If this is happening, we're going to work through the code. If it's not happening, we're going to step through now. We're just going to go to the end of the conditional statement. So it's almost like we've protected this code. It's only going to run if this rule at the top is met. So I'm going to hit the F8 key again now. Now we're on the second sheet in the file. I can hover over chrissheet.name and Excel's going to externalize the information that it associates with that line of code. So now we're looking at the data 1 sheet, which of course is the second sheet in the file. Never forget the basic idea. We're looping through sheets in the file. So if I hit the F8 key now, where's the code going to go? Well, this time we're going to go into the conditional statement because this condition is met. And we're going to go through. We're dynamically defining our ranges B6 to J1141. I'm going to go ahead and check that. So it's very normal to have lots of interaction between the VBA editor and Excel, to be switching between the two. Having multiple screens can really help you with that. Yeah, so J and J1141, yes, is the last cell that contains data in the file. Then I'm just stepping through. Is any of this problematic? Doesn't seem to be problematic. So we should be able to sort our data now. So what we're sorting by column B here. So let's go to data 1 and I can see we are sorted by column B on data 1, but on the data 2 sheet, we're not sorted by column B. So what we'd expect to happen when we run this code is data 2 and data 3, we'd expect them to be sorted by the home team, be sorted by column B. That works, of course, and on beyond the macro recorder, when you're working beyond the macro recorder, things don't always work first time. That's perfectly normal in Excel VBA. We've just got to work through the code, work through those error messages, understanding what's going on. But I've got to say, guys, I'm feeling confident about this one. I'm going to go ahead, just hit play. Did you see how quickly that ran? Let's just do that one more time. You know, and I'm doing my screen recording here. My PC's doing lots of different jobs at the moment. Click of a button, really is click of a button functionality. Let's go to data 3 and I can see data 3 is now sorted. Data 2 now sorted. and data 1 is now sorted 2, although that was sorted previously, of course. Going to go to the bottom here. So I'm just using control and down arrow to quickly navigate to the bottom. Okay, so that's one test, but yeah, I'm not absolutely convinced. Could we go ahead and do something slightly different? Could we change a piece of syntax in the code and predict what's going to happen, do an experiment, and then if it conforms to our expectations, that's built our confidence. So what else might we want to do? We could sort by a different column, for example. That's coming later in the series. I'm just going to change it from ascending to descending order. So rather than going from Z to A, rather than going from A to Z, which is currently happening, we've got Beagle at the top beginning with B. I'm going to go from Z to A. So I believe Staffordshire Terrier, which alphabetically is the last team in the Doggy Football League, that should come to the top now. So now we're testing. Don't believe it. Don't believe it if it works once. Build confidence by testing, changing something in the VBA editor, predicting what's going to happen. Let's see what happens. So I'm hitting play now, and we can see fantastic stuff. The power of VBA here, and we can see our data is now sorted on each sheet. Our data is now sorted in a different order there. So fantastic stuff. That concludes session 2. We've managed so far in this series dynamic position control. So this routine should work for a data set of any size. An incredible function, incredibly powerful. Will save professionals so much time out there. And now we've managed to loop through sheets in the file. Now, we've applied a loop to a sheet in the file, but this for each loop, you could apply to cells in a range. You could apply to buttons in a file. I think we're going to do that later in the series. You could apply to charts on a sheet. You could apply to open workbooks. So the concept you can apply to any collection in Excel. Remember, Excel is just objects organized into collections. You've got to go beyond the macro recorder now. We're equipping you with what I call the meta skills, the skills to test, the skills to organize the code properly, the skills to do the annotations. We're trying to equip you with those meta skills. So to be honest, you don't need to come back to these videos. You can now go on your coding adventure and really get on that exponential curve and start to take your Excel VBA to the next level. I would love to hear about your struggles and about your punch the air moments in the video comments below this video. Leave me a comment there. And don't forget, guys, if you enjoy this long form content, we don't do much on YouTube anymore. We do it all the time in our Members Monday learning community. I used to be a university lecturer. My mission with the community is to create a university type learning environment for a fraction of the cost. You get access to a huge library of resources. You get access to me, access to a member forum, most importantly, a learning community full of like-minded people to support your Excel VBA learning. So that is Beyond the Macro Recorder, session 2. Can't wait to see you in session 3. See you there.